What is up, Heat Seekers? Hey, we're 1 week away from the NFL draft.
We are.
Are you ready for it, Thomas? Because I'm ready for it.
I'm so ready for it. I mean, it's gonna happen at like 3 a.m. in the morning for me, and I have to go to work on the next day, but I'll probably stay up anyway, just because I can't get enough of that stuff.
Pull that NFL draft all-nighter. I like it.
Probably.
I like it. Well, I guess my plans will be watching the draft and then watching Fallout Boy afterwards, live for free. I'm excited. Obviously, next week I'll be in Kansas City for the draft, and it should be a good time. So we're still figuring out the details for next Thursday's show. We might have to start an hour later, but I will be live from Kansas City for next week's show. Just have to figure out the time. Excited for that, though. That'll make for a fun little show there right before the NFL draft starts. So today we are talking about 3 players that we want to leave every rookie draft with, and 3 players that we do not want to touch in our rookie drafts. And this is obviously at current value 1 week before the NFL draft. This could change a lot come, next Friday, Saturday, after people see the first round and second and third rounds there. So first, I say we talk about the players we don't want, and then we could say who we want to leave with instead. What do you think about that, Thomas?
I think that makes a lot of sense, and I mean, looking at the players that we don't want, I think we're close to being in lockstep on a lot of these.
We are pretty close on a couple of these. So why don't you start it off with your first wide receiver there on that list?
Yeah, I think the first guy is Zay Flowers, and generally, I just want to say that a lot of these drafts, I really don't want a lot of these receivers, like generally, and that's gonna be reflected on the players that we don't want, right? But the first one for me is Zay Flowers, and you just hear all these comps, people saying he reminds me so much of Antonio Brown, and that's all good and fine, but like Antonio Brown was the most dominant wide receiver in fantasy for 4 years running. I just don't see Zay Flowers getting anywhere close to that, and he's a dynamic player, don't get me wrong, but his arms are so short, and people continuously say that he can win on the outside, and he did at the college level. I get that, but when you have these short T-Rex arms, you're just gonna have a harder time in the NFL competing with these big cornerbacks, because everyone's gonna be as athletic as you are. So I think that's my biggest issue with Zay Flowers, and a lot of people have him somewhere from pick 108 to 112 in Superflex, and even earlier in 1 QB, and I just don't want Zay Flowers in the first round.
Yeah, I'm not keen on him in the first round, but I'm not as low on him as you. I don't think that I think the arm length is a little bit overblown. I'm not worried about that as much as you at the next level. He gets pretty good separation, but I just don't see. I don't get excited when I watch him. Right, like that's the thing for me. When I watch his tape, I don't get excited, and that's what I want out of a guy that I'm going to take at that pick. I don't necessarily hate him. I just don't get excited. So I could see myself getting a few shares of him here and there, but I'm not targeting him. But I'm not actively avoiding either. It just depends on how that draft is went. But like you, I'm not super excited about him. I'm just not as low on him as you are. The next one on the list, I think I'm torn on this one. It's Jalin Hyatt from Tennessee. Why don't you tell people like what you've got written down here, and then I'll give my points on that.
Yeah, so I mean, we've already talked about this earlier about his speed maybe not being as top end as we expected when we saw him run at the combine, and I get it. He looks really fast on tape. And then I saw another show, and people were talking about his reception perception chart, and I just saw it, and I was like, dude, this guy cannot run routes for his life. Like, he is basically just running the 9 route and flat routes. That's like the 2 routes that he wins on. And then when you look at how he matches up against man coverage, against zone coverage, against press coverage, he's just not great. Like, he's very, very pedestrian in these areas. Like, his percentile score against man coverage is 42nd percentile. He's 4th percentile against zone coverage, which is absolutely terrible. Then he's 18th percentile against press coverage. And all of this just leads me to believe that he's not really going to consistently win at all at the NFL level.
My thing in regards to Hyatt is he has the natural thing that you want, right? That what he needs to learn at the next level is stuff that is coachable, that is teachable. And
True.
if it just depends on where he falls for me. Like, if he's in the second round, I'll take shots all day in the second round, right? Like, I would have taken shots on John Ross when he came out if he would have been in the second round instead of, going like pick 5, 6, 7 because he was a top 10 NFL pick, right? So that's where I'm at with Hyatt. Like, I understand, but it's the same thing. Like, people had the same argument about DK Metcalf. It doesn't mean that you can't be a successful NFL fantasy receiver, especially if you're getting somebody in the second round of a rookie draft without having a full route tree, right? And a lot of guys coming out of college just don't have full route trees because they're not asked to run those routes at the college level because they're so good at just beating people deep. So he's just a big question mark for me. Again, I'm not actively targeting him, but I am willing to take shots at the right picks in the draft on Jalin Hyatt because I do think he has stuff that could lead to, like Deshaun Jackson style from early in his career where he just, like, big plays made it up, but he was, we might be able to throw Jalin Hyatt in a flex and have boom or bust potential, which I don't mind. If I can get him in the second round somewhere. If he goes high enough in the NFL draft, he's going to be a first round rookie pick. And then I'm probably more on the void side, but it will just depend on where he drops in the draft. But we've seen him mocked everywhere from late first in early second. So there is the potential that he could go that high and then kind of ruin his fantasy rookie value. Because he'll go too high in rookie drafts for me.
Yeah, I think generally it's like I'm never like 110% out on anyone. Like you're saying, if the price is right, I will still take these players. So like there are scenarios that I will be picking, say, Flowers and Jalin Hyatt if I believe that the price is right. I just think I'm lower on them than a lot of other people they are.
Yeah, I would say I'm lower than the consensus, just not like off of them completely like I am the next guy. And if you've been paying attention to me at all for the past couple months, I mean, back to when college was still going, I was adamant that I was not a Quentin Johnston fan. And when I dig in on him, when I watch the tape again, I don't get excited. I obviously understand the excitement around his size, but we've seen that with guys like Kevin White and N'Keal Harry and going back to Dorial Green Beckham and like size doesn't make you a good NFL prospect, right? Like being a good receiver does. And when I watched Quentin Johnston, I do not get the vibe that he is going to be a good NFL wide receiver. And the scary part for me is when you look at a guy that has been as hyped as him, you want to see consistency at the college level. And whether or not you think Max Duggan is a good quarterback or not, like, they did not have a tough schedule against the pass. So I went through and was looking here, and he started off the season with 4 games against Colorado, Tarleton State, who I had never heard of before. We had what was it? Oklahoma and
SMU, I believe.
we had Kansas. Yeah. Tarleton State, SMU, Colorado, and Oklahoma. So Oklahoma, Colorado, both bottom 20 in NCAA and pass yards given up. Obviously, Tarleton State is not even Division I, but they give up 241 passing yards per game. He started with like 110 yards versus those 4 teams. 4 games, he put up 68% or 64% of his production. That was Kansas, Oklahoma State, Kansas State, and Michigan. Michigan was the only team that gives up less than 200 passing yards per game that he actually put up numbers against. It was just a mixed bag, not consistent enough for me. Didn't dominate bottom end teams like he should have. The Colorados, Oklahomas, West Virginia gave up the 21st most. He dudded against them. Texas Tech, 28th most. I mean, over half of his games were against teams that were in the bottom 30 in passing yards. At the college level, he only put up 1,069 yards. And out of the 1,069, it was 688 yards in 4 of the games. So he's not consistent enough for me. We saw what happened in the national championship against a good Georgia, and they're not even as good against the pass as Michigan, but they're a good defense. But 1 catch for 3 yards, like that's the closest you're gonna get to NFL competition. For TCU in college, right? Like they didn't play Alabama or anybody like that. So Georgia, obviously national champs, dud. 1 for 3 yards. That's not what I want to see out of a prospect that I'm going to have to take in with a top 8 pick. I see big bust potential. And you were just saying in the last player we were talking about that you're never completely out on a player. I don't know, man. Quentin Johnston, I may be completely out on. Even if he drops into the mid-second. I just don't see it. I know a lot of people do, and I could definitely be wrong, and it will definitely hurt, but I'm not a Quentin Johnston guy. I want to pass on him in every draft. Every draft possible. I've been saying it for 3 months. It's nothing new. What are your thoughts there, Thomas?
I think, like, you've already talked about all the stuff in season, and to me, like, you have very good arguments, and I think it sort of continues when you then look at everything leading up to the draft, because even at his pro day, he was inconsistent. Like, he had drops at his pro day. That is not something you want to see.
Right.
And you just have to worry, like, in a perfect environment, he still couldn't perform anywhere close to be perfect, and that is very, very concerning. And obviously, again, it's something we can fix, at least on a theoretical level, right?
Yeah.
But there's also like the thing about his size, because early on in the process, I was drawn to his size. I love both at running back and at wide receiver. I love these big guys. Like, just give me these prototypical alpha wide receivers, big running backs who can just bowl people over. I love those types of guys. When you look at Quentin Johnston on tape, he rarely played to his size either, and that's another red flag, right? Because when you are big, you want to see people, like, you want to see receivers moss people, like Mike Williams did in college. Mike Williams had other issues in the NFL, not being able to stay healthy and all that stuff. But like, Quentin Johnston is big. He should just go up and tell people, this is my ball. Like, you're not getting it. This might be way out to my left, but I'm still going to go up and get it. Like, screw you, tiny cornerback, right? And I think that's some of the issues that I have with Johnston. I'm not entirely out on him, but again, like, I really, like, after JSN and Addison, I probably don't want to take any of these wide receivers until maybe in the mid-second round. I just rather want to take shots on some of the guys that we're going to be talking about next.
It's I can't, like, I feel bad because there's very few prospects that I'm like this low on, that I'm this adamant about, that I don't want. Obviously he's a talented guy, but when it comes to the NFL, I see more Kelvin Benjamin, N'Keal Harry. Kevin White's not even really fair because he was just hurt. I mean, he played like 4 games in his first 3 years or something. But I just see that bust potential, and I don't want any of it. We don't see like the big guys that we see, like you said, use that size and have speed to go with it, right? Like we were talking about DK Metcalf earlier. Like DK Metcalf, like he uses his size. You feel his presence, and I don't think that we're gonna feel Quentin Johnston's presence on the NFL field. We didn't even see it in the national championship. Like, you didn't feel him at all. Like, he wasn't even making impacts in other ways that could help his team. Like you see with guys like DK Metcalf, even when they're not getting all the receptions, they're still impacting the game in other ways. And you still have to worry about them. I just don't feel like Georgia was ever worried about Quentin Johnston.
No.
All right.
And I think the last part as well is like, he's a TCU wide receiver. Like, it's kind of beating a dead horse, right? Like the Ohio State can't develop quarterbacks kind of stuff. But like, we just haven't seen TCU wide receivers be good at the NFL level. So that is a bit worrisome.
I may be a little jaded from my Jalen Reagor love in the past, but we're gonna move right to another TCU player that we do like. So we're done trashing players. We're done with the concentration on trashing players, and we are going to move to players that we want to come out of every draft with. And this first one, I know we agree on. He's the one where, during the national championship, when everybody was talking about Quentin Johnston, I was just like, man, I want Kendre Miller to get healthy and make this game. Unfortunately, he didn't, which I think would have really helped TCU. Not that they would have won, but it would have really helped their offense because I think he's really good. But Kendre Miller, running back, TCU, what are your thoughts on him, and why do you want to come out of every draft with him on your squad?
He's just like, when you look at him, he looks so good on tape. This season when he broke out, basically, we also saw him take the starting job from Zach Evans. Like, they were splitting time last year, and then prior to this season, Zach Evans decided to transfer to Ole Miss, which basically was because Kendre Miller just took a starting job. Kendre Miller is only in quotation marks a 3-star recruit, where Zach Evans, I believe, was a 5-star recruit coming out of high school.
I think at one point Evans was the number 1 running back prospect, wasn't he?
Yeah.
I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure.
He was like 1 or 2. Like, it was him and Bichon coming out of high school. I know that for sure. And just having seen Miller be able to take the starting job away from someone who's allegedly better than him is something I want. Like, I just want these guys who are just used to walking on the field and saying, I might not be the starter right now, but that's going to change. And then you just look at the way he runs. He has very, very good balance, and he's just so efficient as a runner. Like, he's hard to bring down early on. He has good vision, and he just puts up yards continuously. And I believe he put up like 6.2 yards per carry this season, which is amazing, even for college. So he's someone I want, and I think, like, we obviously have to see the NFL draft to know where the NFL values all these different running backs, because there are so many running backs right now that we don't actually know, like, how in what order do the NFL kind of like them, and that's gonna determine their final range in rookie drafts. But Kendre Miller is probably not gonna end up in the first round, based on at least the mock drafts that we see right now. And just give me Kendre Miller every time in the second round.
Yeah, I actually kind of hope that he goes in that third round range, late second, third round, because that'll temper fantasy expectations on him. He'll stay in that 20 range in rookie drafts, which is where I want him, because he's kind of like my Kareem Hunt of this draft. Like, there's nothing that you watch on film where you're like, oh my god, he is like the most amazing running back at this, but he does everything really, really well. And I feel like he is a guy that is going to surprise a lot of people at the next level. And for me, it doesn't matter what order running backs go in the draft either, because every team's going to have their flavor, right? And there's like, 3 or 4 different types of running backs, and one may fit with a team and not with another, right? So my biggest thing is just if they get drafted in the top 5 rounds, they have a legit shot at getting an opportunity in the NFL, unlike other positions for fantasy, right? Like quarterbacks that go in the 5th round, not very often. Wide receivers are a little bit tougher when they get past the 3rd round. Tight ends can be from anywhere or whatever. I mean, any of them can be, but yeah, I'm not worried about the draft so much for Kendre Miller. It's just, not landing behind a Saquon Barkley or a Christian McCaffrey, where we're going to have to wait on some time. They're going to get limited touches in their rookie year. So that's really the only thing that I don't want with Kendre Miller. Like, if he ends up anywhere where they don't have a stud starter that takes all the touches, I think he's going to get an opportunity and could be a big difference maker on your fantasy team right out of the gate.
Yeah, I think maybe I should clarify when I say that the draft is going to have an impact on Miller, and I think it's more like in what order the consensus in fantasy is going to be. Like, what order are they going to go off the board in the rookie draft? I think that's going to be impacted by the NFL draft, but I'm still going to take Kendre Miller regardless.
Yep, that's where I'm at with it. I agree on that. Next up is a late addition by me. This guy is quickly, and I mean quickly, moving way up my wide receiver rankings and may be my number 3 right now in this class, and it's Jonathan Mingo out of Ole Miss. Still a guy that is going in like the 4th round of 1 QB rookie drafts. I love it. With the lack of talent or excitement that I have about this class as a whole from the wide receiver position, this is a guy that I could see end up sneaking into the back part of the 1st round of the NFL draft. He has moved in some mocks up into the 1st round. Could be high 2nd round. But 6'2", 215 pounds, and the kid does something at wide receiver that is important to start your career, and that is block. He can block. I don't think teams are going to be afraid to put him on the field, and I feel like this is a guy that can win in a lot of different ways. He could be a bigger slot-style receiver. He can win some on the outside. I think that he runs routes well enough. I think he'll get better at that in the NFL as well. And I just think this dude might be... I wouldn't surprise me if he ends up being the 2nd best receiver in this class. Again, we've talked about it a little bit. We're not super stoked about a lot of the wide receivers. But Jonathan Mingo, right now, I feel is super underrated. This could get ruined a lot by the NFL draft, and if he does go in the 1st round, then by the time your rookie draft comes around, he might be going in the 2nd, which I'm fine with. If he gets that type of draft capital, I'll take him in the 1st round. I'll take him over the guys that we've already talked about that we didn't want. I'll already take him over Quentin Johnston, but the Zay Flowers and guys like that, I could definitely see him going ahead of them in rookie drafts this time. Well, not this time next week, but like this time plus a day next week, if he does end up going in the 1st round. I just think that he is an underrated talent that is very likely to change a week from today, but hopefully he's still a high second round pick, that would be great value, I think, for Jonathan Mingo.
Yeah, I think he's someone who's only come onto my radar lately, and I still think I need to watch some more tape from him. But he is, like, we talked about how QJ doesn't really play to his size. Like, Jonathan Mingo plays to his size, and that's something I love. And like, even in our sort of honorable mentions, I have another guy that does pretty much the same. Michael Wilson out of Stanford. He does a lot of the same things that Jonathan Mingo does. But yeah, I think Mingo, as you said, he's someone who's rising up boards, and we might see him in the early second. I kind of want to see how the NFL sort of sees him, but again, like we've heard mock drafts where he's in the back end of the first round. So if that's sort of where he goes in the NFL draft, or even in the second round, I think he's going to be shooting up draft boards really, really quick.
Yeah, I definitely do not think that you're going to get him for a fourth rounder come the week
Not
next
anymore.
weekend, right? I don't think that's going to happen. But like this dude's also like a running back after he gets the ball in his hands. And he's got that like running back size too, right? A little bit taller, but 6'2", 215. Like he can put a hurting on some cornerbacks and after he gets the ball in his hands. So I think he's gonna be a playmaker at the next level. I love Jonathan Mingo.
It's the Ole Miss wide receiver factory over there.
I mean, they do too.
Yeah, AJ Brown, Elijah Moore,
and he's kind of that same. He's kind of that same like AJ Brown mold. He's not as fast. I don't think he plays as fast, but he's got that yards after the catch and
after it.
I like him a lot. So I'm definitely on board with Jonathan Mingo. Next up is Tyjae Spears out of Tulane. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about what you're thinking about Tyjae Spears.
Tyjae Spears was someone that came onto my radar when I was doing the Senior Bowl sort of coverage for RotoHeat. I was doing an article, and you just looked at this guy and you just saw like this guy does everything you want a running back to do. He pass blocks well, he catches the ball well, he has great vision, understands how to set up his blocks. He's dynamic. He's hard to tackle. Like the only downside to Tyjae Spears is that he's not the biggest guy. Like if he gets gang tackled, he's not gonna move the pile. Like you might see a couple linemen get on his back and sort of start pushing him, but that's really the only downside I see to Tyjae Spears. And I'm at a point with him where I'm willing to take him at the end of the first round in rookie drafts. He just does everything so well that he can just like and that's the thing, like he may not become an early down grinder for a team, but then he becomes the pass catcher, or a team could just pick him up to make him the early downs back. So that's the thing, like he has a 3-down skill set, so he can fit in any role a team wants him to fit into.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you like players like Pollard, then Spears is a guy that you can get behind, right? Like, it's not like he's 5'8", like Deuce Vaughn, right? Because I think if Deuce Vaughn was 5'11", we'd probably be pretty excited about him as well. But the Tyreek Cohen, like, I think that's like the bad side of Tyjae Spears, right? If he's just catching passes with a few touches, right? But that's still valuable for fantasy. Tyreek Cohen had I think he was RB 12 or 13 one year just from catching passes. So that's kind of like I wouldn't say that's his floor, because obviously he could just not get any action at all. But I think like that's one route to go, which is a good route. And then there's the route like you were talking about, where he actually gets early down work and receiving work and can combine those. Now, I don't think he's going to be Christian McCaffrey type usage.
Probably not.
But, you know, he could be a 180, 200 carry guy and get you 65, 70 receptions, and that'd be pretty damn good.
Yeah. And I mean, even when you look at, like, he's not like super small. Like he's still a fine back, and he's bulky. Like when you look at him, you can tell that he's not just like this slight build. He's bulky and he plays violently. Like he even though he's not the biggest guy, he wants to run people over. Like he does his best at like running people over, and I just love the fire. Like I just want to see these types of guys that are just gonna do everything they can to get you yards. And at the Senior Bowl, he was like basically all 3 days of practice. He was like the one that people were talking about at running back. Like you had Chase Brown, who's maybe the best running back coming into the Senior Bowl there, but like everyone was just raving about Tyjae Spears, and he's just continued like sort of his upswing during this entire offseason.
Yeah, the trajectory he kind of reminds me of another Tulane back. Can you guess who I'm going to say?
Not entirely.
Chicago Bears.
Is Khalil Herbert from Tulane?
One Mr. Matt Forte.
Right. I do not remember that he was from Tulane.
Yep, definitely from Tulane. But we're talking about a guy that, he was a little bit taller, but his build was pretty similar. Yeah. Forte was 6'2". But a guy that could get early down work and catch the ball out of the backfield. Not a carbon copy, but kind of a similar thing. And Matt Forte was a guy that during the draft prospect really made his name and ended up being taken by the Chicago Bears. So I kind of see that same trajectory for Spears, who there was a little bit of excitement about. I think when the offseason first started, he was a guy that people were talking about taking a shot late second in rookie drafts, the third round, and now somebody, Mr. Shane Hallam from Draft Countdown, somebody that I respect a lot when it comes to rookie evaluation. Mock draft the other night he was in with us, and somebody took Spears in the first round of a super flex, and Shane said he loved to see it. And then in the 1 QB mock, Shane took him at I think number 8, or he was either 8 or 9 in a 1 QB. So the hype on is growing. That's the tough part about getting him in every draft, right? Is that you're gonna have to reach a little bit to get him, and that could mean taking him at 106, 107 if that's where you're at in the draft and you really like him.
I think that's not that much of an issue. Like especially for me personally, like I have a big tier break in Superflex after it's after the 108, and in 1 QB it's like after the 104, 105, right? And then like if I like Tyjae Spears, I'm just gonna grab him at that point because there's a lot of these guys that I don't want. Like we've just talked about your Safe Flowers, your Jalin Hyatts, your Quentin Johnstons. Like if you don't want those guys at the back of your first or in the second half of your first round, you might as well take someone like Tyjae Spears if you like him.
Oh yeah. In that range, I'm talking about to actually get him though. You may have to move up to get him to solidify that with the hype and the way that it's growing. If he ends up going in the early second round of the NFL draft, that's like pushing draft picks, running backs to like, third, fourth overall in rookie drafts. You know how it goes when you get that type of draft capital at running back. So that's what I'm talking about. That's why he's a little bit tough to come out of every draft with, just because I think the hype is building on him and everybody kind of wants him. And he's already starting to go in the first round, so the NFL draft could catapult that CEH style, right? Like,
sure.
CEH was the 9th overall rookie and then gets drafted by Kansas City, and now he's like the 10th overall player in fantasy. So that's like the type of worry that I have with Spears, because I do think he could get that type of hype. Maybe not, he's not going to pass Bijan. He's probably not going to pass JSN, but I mean, if he goes ahead of Gibbs in the NFL draft, which isn't completely out of the question, we're talking about a different story. He could be the third pick in rookie drafts, right?
Yeah, I think, but I mean, we've talked about this a lot, and I think we tell our communities a lot as well. Like, don't overreact to these landing spots. Like, we see it every single year, and every single year we just see how terrible the fantasy community is at like predicting how good a landing spot is for these guys. So I think like even if he gets a great landing spot, if he gets great draft capital, like don't be the guy to take him at like second overall before JSN.
It'll happen for sure.
Probably, but that's
well, I mean,
happen, right?
Well, yeah, but I mean, we're not going to be able to change like the community's mind, right? Like that's gonna happen. Like if he goes, let's say, pick 38 in the draft, like the community is as a whole is going to push him up into the top 3-4 picks probably. Yeah. That doesn't mean you have to take him in the top 3 or 4 picks. Like there's a point where it becomes too much, and then it, you know, like you said with most players, even if you don't like them, there comes a point where they're just too cheap and you have to take a shot. So he's just the one out of them that I'm worried because he's already high in the draft order, right? Because like, I mean, I could easily pick JSN. Like I want to come out of every draft with JSN. Yeah. Or with Bijan. It's not going to happen. But I feel like Spears could get thrust into kind of that atmosphere depending on how that, like if it goes Bijan running back 1 and say he goes pick 20 whatever and then pick 35 comes around and Spears is the second running back off the board, we're not gonna be able to get him in every draft anymore.
Obviously not.
All right, we got some notable mentions here. Marvin Mims, wide receiver, Oklahoma. Why don't you tell us a little bit about why you like him?
He's just good down the field, man. I've even seen like some the mock drafts have him like late second round where he ends up in this like Kansas City Chiefs, Buffalo Bills offense. He does that, he's gonna skyrocket. Like we just know that, right? Like we just talked about CH before. If he gets one of these landing spots, he's gonna skyrocket, and we're not gonna get him cheap. I still think he's someone you want to target sort of late or mid to late second round. Just look at Marvin Mims because he does exactly what you want from a deep threat. He's like, to me, he's what I would want Jalin Hyatt to be, to take Jalin Hyatt in the back of the first round. But Marvin Mims can do those things. He's just a lot cheaper, so that's why I want Mims.
I can definitely get on board with Mims. The next guy is a guy that I actually moved into Mingo's spot first, and then I was like, man, I really want Mingo though. Roschon Johnston, running back out of Texas, I think is another guy that is very, very underrated. And the biggest reason why that is because he had to share a backfield with one Bijan Robinson. And when you're sharing a backfield with Bijan Robinson, you're kind of taking a back seat, right? And I think that if this guy was in another situation, we could be talking about him as maybe a top 3 or 4 consistent pick in these rookie drafts. Like, I think he could be above Gibbs and above Spears. And I think that he's a guy that has a lot of talent that didn't get to showcase it consistently because of who he shared the backfield with. And we've seen this happen before, right? I mean, you remember Alabama when they had a running back room of Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs, Kenyon Drake, and Alvin Kamara. Like, yeah. I mean, what are you going to do? If you're Alvin Kamara, you move to Tennessee. And then, since you moved to Tennessee and they already have an established running back, you don't even end up being the running back that gets the most work there. When we've seen, Antonio Gibson in Memphis, like, the dude didn't get a lot of work, whether he was playing wide receiver or running back. Like, sometimes you just have a super stud ahead of you and don't get to showcase your talent as much. And, we've seen it with wide receivers, right? Like, Justin Jefferson wasn't the highest touted out of that LSU receiving core, but is the best receiver in the NFL right now. I just had another one on my brain, and I forgot it. Looking at Ohio State, right? Like, 2 years ago, you would have looked at JSN, and you'd have been like, this dude is the best wide receiver out of the 3. And then you've got Olave and Garrett Wilson. Those 3, I mean, for one, the best wide receiver was sitting on the bench Marvin Harrison Jr. with those three on the team.
You can throw Jameson Williams in there too.
Jameson Williams
to Alabama.
Yeah. So like sometimes you're just behind those guys, right? And Olave didn't get as much action at Ohio State as Wilson and JSN, but he performed admirably once he got into right from the get-go, right? So I think that's kind of the situation that Roschon Johnston was in for Texas, and he's a guy that for my Bears I was, late second round pick, I was excited, or early third round pick for them to get him. Now they ended up signing Foreman, so I don't think it's necessary for them to draft a running back that high, but he's a kid that I think could very much come into the league and surprise a lot of people.
Yeah, and also with Roschon, it's like you just hear this buzz that the NFL loves this guy. Like everything I've heard from other podcasts and people in the know, it's like when you hear these different things, is that the NFL loves this guy. He's a huge leader, and he was basically one of the leaders at Texas, and the NFL loves those guys. Like these guys who just comes in every day, just sets an example for everyone else. So I think he could actually go in the second round in the NFL draft. If he does that, he's probably gonna vault into the conversation of a late first round pick in rookie drafts.
If he goes that high, it might be mid first round pick. Yeah, it might be mid. So Cedric Tillman, wide receiver, Tennessee. Why don't you tell us a little bit about this? Because he's kind of like the same situation, right? He's, Jalin Hyatt's the one that gets all the attention, and Cedric Tillman's here as another wide receiver from Tennessee that played pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, if you just look 1 year further away than this past season, Tillman was the guy in Tennessee's offense. Like, no one knew who Jalin Hyatt was at that point. It was just Cedric Tillman doing everything at wide receiver for this Tennessee offense. And again, I already said earlier, I love these big dudes. Like the dudes that plays like an alpha. Cedric Tillman does that. He is an alpha wide receiver on the field, and he's already put up incredible numbers for a season. And then he was injured last season, which is why he sort of had to start out taking a backseat to Jalin Hyatt. And then Jalin Hyatt sort of exploded while Tillman was still recovering, and then Hyatt sort of got all the buzz, but Tillman has been the one who's sort of consistently produced. Like we talked about with Quentin Johnston, we want to see this consistency, and that's what Tillman has done. So he's someone who's rapidly sort of rising in my rankings towards the final rankings that we're going to put out soon. Do you know anything about Tillman, or is he somewhat of a
he's an
enigma for you?
No. He is a guy that I mean, I don't get like super excited for, but I think he's a guy that I will be taking shots on in the mid second round. Yeah. I think that I do like his skill set. I just I see him probably as a wide receiver 3, like ceiling in the NFL, which is fine. Like that's good. I think he's got a solid floor to go with it as well. So, I'm like lukewarm. You know what I mean? Like I don't hate it. I don't love it, but don't hate it. The next two guys, I don't like. It's not that I don't want them. I just don't know a lot. Like I don't know a lot about Wilson. I know more about the last guy. So why don't you tell us about Wilson? I can't say a whole lot because I'm just not as up to speed on him as you are. So why don't you tell us a little bit about Michael Wilson, wide receiver out of Stanford?
I just think Wilson is a lot, like, has a lot of the same qualities that you mentioned with Jonathan Mingo. Like, he's this big dude who plays to his size. He's good after the catch. He has good hands. He's a decent route runner. He again, like, he's just one of these big guys who plays big. And we've heard I've heard in podcasts and different things that this guy is someone who's sort of he's not as fast, like rising as fast as Jonathan Mingo is on NFL teams' draft board, but he's sort of silently climbing, and he could be like a third round pick in the NFL draft, and I still think he's someone like, again, he's a Senior Bowl guy, which is why I sort of started looking into him. And then you just see a guy who plays big, blocks, again, like Jonathan Mingo, and he does everything you want to see from these big wide receivers. He's gonna win down the field in contested catch situations, and some team's gonna take a shot on that. And I think it's worth taking shots at that in sort of the late second, early third round of rookie drafts.
Sounds good. Why don't you give us the rundown on Evan Hull, running back, Northwestern?
Yeah, I talked about this guy on ours when we were talking about like sleeper rookies and guys that we liked after the combine. And Evan Hull was the guy, if you remember, that I talked about. He was the guy who would continue running into the end zone on every single play.
Like to see that motor.
Yeah, you just want to see that, especially from a guy who probably knows that he's not going to be like a day 1 or maybe even a day 2 pick. You just want to see this fire in a guy, right? And he's a great pass catcher. And someone's going to take him on day 3 to make him like a third down back, because I believe he caught like 80 passes in his last season, and he's been consistently catching a lot of passes out of Northwestern. And then like he was the next best player or the next best running back at the Senior Bowl after Tyjae Spears, and he was the best player in the actual Senior Bowl. I thought he was better than Jake Haener, who actually got the Senior Bowl MVP. I was like, you should have given that to Evan Hull, because every time he touched the ball, he would just give you like 6 yards plus. Like every run, he just had 6 yards. Give it to him again, another first down. Pass it to him, get 15 yards. Like he just consistently is going to keep moving the chains for a team, and that's something I love to see in these sleeper type picks.
Yeah. Again, I don't have a lot of knowledge on Evan Hull. What I've seen, I've liked. He is definitely one that is going to be interesting to see how the NFL draft treats him. But for me, it'll just depend on where everything ends up working out after the NFL draft and where he's at in comparison to other players in regards to value in rookie drafts and where they're at. But don't love or hate him either. The last thing that I want to talk about before we cash out here is we have a little bit different viewpoint on rookie tight ends, right? We actually took the tight ends off of this sheet. You had ones on guys that you two tight ends you had on I don't want anything to do with in drafts, and another guy on I want to come out of every draft with this tight end. You are like 100% against drafting a tight end in the first round of rookie drafts. Now, where I differ is it just depends on the players that we're comparing them to, right? Like, not every draft is the same. This draft, I have no problem with taking Michael Mayer in the first round of rookie drafts. Zero problem at all, because after you get past the first handful of guys, I have really, really, really big question marks for a lot of players. And when it comes to the tight end position, I think people forget how damn good Michael Mayer is. And it kind of reminds me of, Trevor Lawrence. You remember that offseason before the draft when it was like everybody had something they had found that was wrong with Trevor Lawrence for some reason? Or Jamar Chase when he was coming in? Like, it gets to a point where you see the player do so much good that you are now just looking for what's wrong. And I feel like that's where the community kind of got with Michael Mayer. We've talked about all the good. Like there was not a whole lot of bad being talked about for the last couple years, and then all of a sudden it was, okay, now we got to it's draft time. We got to find out what's wrong with this guy instead of talking about what he's good at. And he's good at damn near everything at the tight end position. So, I wanted to take a point to that, right? Like, with Kyle Pitts, I still think Kyle Pitts has a chance to be a phenomenal NFL tight end. But the problem I had with Kyle Pitts in that specific draft was there were people taking him above Jamar Chase. That was my issue with the tight end that high, right? Like, if you're telling me Michael Mayer or JSN, it's JSN every time. If you're talking about him versus Gibbs or Bijan or any of the quarterbacks when it comes to Superflex, like, it's those guys first, yes. But after that, like, if you're telling me I can take a choice between Addison and Michael Mayer, like, I'm much more confident that Michael Mayer is going to help my fantasy team. Even if it takes 2 years before he does it, it could take Addison 3 years. I mean, the wide receiver breakout used to be 3 years, right? Like, you just wanted to see incremental improvements as they progress through those first 2 years, and then the third year boom comes, right? So that's where I'm at with him. I don't think any other tight end. I know people are on the Dalton Kincaid bandwagon. I don't think any tight end in this class is close to Michael Mayer. And I don't think any tight end in the past 4 or 5 years, other than Kyle Pitts, has been as good of a prospect as Michael Mayer. I think it's Pitts and then Michael Mayer out of probably the last 4 or 5 drafts, tight end prospects that I really liked. And I really liked guys like Dallas Goedert and Noah Fant as well, which has worked out on different levels. And Dallas Goedert's been really damn good, and Noah Fant, like, just seems not to be able to find the right spot for him. But yeah, I mean, that's how high I am on Michael Mayer. So really, I mean, if anybody took him ahead of, anybody not named Bijan, Gibbs, JSN, or, the top 4 quarterbacks right now, so what, 8 in Superflex? Like, I wouldn't really argue with you. I think he's a safe player, even though tight end could take some time. But he could break out in the first year. Maybe not Kyle Pitts numbers or Evan Ingram numbers, but he, at the tight end position, I mean, even getting in the 8th, 9th in the tight end ranks at the end of next year wouldn't be crazy, and it doesn't take a whole lot.
No, I mean, the tight end landscape is obviously weird to figure out. Like, we have our top 5, and then there's, like, everybody else, right?
Yeah.
For me, it more comes down to sort of opportunity cost, and I just like taking these running backs and wide receivers because you're just gonna have to have a lot more of those guys on your roster, right? So it sort of comes down to roster construction for me, and I get it. Like, if you love Michael Mayer, you should take him. Like, I'm never gonna be against getting your guy because I really love the whole, like, if you believe so strongly in a guy, you just need to take him. That's where I'm at with, like, Tyjae Spears and Kendre Miller, right? So if he's that for someone, I'm not really gonna argue with it. I just think there's so much value to be had at tight end later on that I'm probably gonna pass on, well, especially Dalton Kincaid. And I think Mayer is one of those guys where, like, maybe he ends up blocking a lot early on in his career. But again, it's just I sort of hate grabbing someone that I know is probably gonna take two years for him to actually crack my starting lineup. And I think that's my biggest issue with it, especially when there are other good tight ends, maybe not great like Mayer could be, but there are other good tight ends that I can get later who is gonna have very good upside and who's gonna, like, be a stash anyway.
Yeah, it's like I said, for me, it's draft dependent, and other than, a few guys, like, I'm not confident that any of these rookies are going to come in right away and just blow you out of the water, right? There's not very many running backs that are, like, instant starters in the NFL. Guaranteed, I should say. Some of them may turn out that way, but looking at it just from the perspective we're looking at it now, there's a lot of wide receivers. I mean, everybody else, I think JSN's a day one starter and contributor. Other than him, I'm not confident that any of the wide receivers are. And then obviously quarterbacks are just a whole different thing. But that's why This draft, I'm not too concerned about that because I feel like every player in his range is going to have question marks, and we're not going to know if they're going to come in and be starters right away or if they're going to have to work their way into a rotation or what. So that's why, like, this draft, I'm okay with it. If it would have been, the year where Jefferson and those guys were going in the late first, that's like a whole different story, right? Like that was a back half of a first where we were going, man, you can get some real talent in the back part of this first round. Or the draft with CMC and Fournette and Hunt and Kamara and Corey Davis, Mike Williams were all in that. Like they had Evan Ingram, who was a first round tight end in that draft, and those ones are a little bit tougher when you get back there. Obviously, Evan Ingram looked great, even at, I think he was like around pick 8 or something in those drafts in one QB, and then comes out and has like one of the best rookie seasons for a tight end ever, and you thought, yes, off to the races, gonna hit it, and then had some ups and downs in there. But yeah, I mean, Michael Mayer, Baby Gronk, it's not the same as like the other guys that have been called Baby Gronk, right? Like this dude actually went to tight end university, Notre Dame, and dominated against all competition levels. Unlike guys like Adam Shaheen, who had that nickname, who came from Ashland University and nobody knew where he came from and all that. So it was just a guy with size, right? And that's why I think Michael Mayer could end up being a top 4 tight end in the NFL, I think. And that's why I'm willing to take shots on him, because if he has even if he has a decent rookie year, you're not going to get him at a better price than what he is even as a, 7, 8, 9 in rookie drafts. So that's where I'm at with him. But you did have one tight end that you did want to come out of the draft with. Why don't you mention him a little bit, and then we'll get out of here.
Yeah, it was Zach Kuntz. But generally, there's a lot of tight ends that I like in this class, and that's sort of why I'm willing to pass on a Kincaid or a Michael Mayer. But when you just see someone who's got this perfect RAS score, relative athletic score, he had a 10 out of 10 relative athletic score, and it's, to me, it's sort of mind-boggling that you can even say someone can't get even more, someone can't get more athletic for their build. To me, that's sort of ludicrous. But enough about that. It's he's just, we know tight ends generally have to be stashes anyway, at least when you're not taking your Kyle Pitts type of tight end. So for me, it's all these guys are going to sit on your bench or on your taxi squad. Might as well just get this super athletic dude who can jump out of the freaking building like Anthony Richardson did at QB, right? This guy was the Anthony Richardson of tight ends this season. And I just I love that a guy can be that athletic, and if a team can mold him, that is gonna be awesome. And if not, he's gonna be so cheap that it's not really gonna matter for you.
All right, that was our show for this week. As mentioned earlier, next week we're probably definitely going to be later, at least 12:30 start, maybe 1 o'clock Eastern start. Next week I will be in Kansas City at the NFL Draft and streaming live from there. So we had to find a host back home. So that one. We'll know next Thursday. We'll either start at noon or 1 o'clock or somewhere in between there, Eastern time. But we will be talking about the NFL Draft and having some fun from Kansas City. Until then, we'll see you later.
See you guys.